Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Please welcome to the stage Jay Nordlinger and U.S. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos.
Well, those names were definitely announced in the wrong order. Such a pleasure to have Secretary DeVos. She is from Michigan, Holland, Michigan. And as she puts it, she went away to school a half an hour to Grand Rapids to Calvin College. And she and Dick got married. Dick is a member of our board, the National Review Institute board. They've been involved in education for decades as philanthropists and reformers and political warriors. And I'm awfully glad you're Ed Secretary.
Thank you. I'm not sure this is on. Oh,
Yeah? Let's talk a bit. You got it? Good.
I think it's on now.
So I'm glad you're Education Secretary. Are you?
I am indeed.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
Most days I am.
Did you ever think you would be Education Secretary? You've been in the trenches for so long, and here you are at the levers of power, so to speak.
No, I never had a goal of or a dream about being Education Secretary, but when the opportunity arose, I could not say no. I've been involved, as you indicated, in education reform and advocating for education freedom and school choice for more than 3 decades. And this is a natural extension of what I've been doing for all those years.
Well, this is an ideas summit, and you have big ideas, one of which is Education Freedom Scholarships. Sounds good. What is it?
Education Freedom Scholarships is a proposal from the administration. It has corresponding bills that have been introduced in both the House and the Senate now. And what it would do is create a federal tax credit that individuals and corporations could contribute to voluntarily, and states could elect to participate or not participate. It's a choice. If they do participate, they would be able to create a program or programs to expand choices for families and students in K-12 education in that particular state. And we think it's a really great way to help continue to build on the momentum around education choice, education freedom nationally. There are many states that have adopted some programs, but this would allow them to really jumpstart in the states that haven't done it yet and take a bigger leap in states like Florida that have really been a leader in this area.
You told me once that Illinois, rather surprisingly, was pretty good on this kind of issue.
Well, Illinois, surprisingly, within the last couple of years, passed a tax credit program, tax credit scholarship program. Now, the new governor has threatened to do away with it. It's under attack. But it was passed in a state that is the bluest of blue, and many students there, thousands of students there today, are able to find the right fit for their education because of this opportunity.
So this is Betsy DeVos. She says, we need to rethink school. We must question everything about the way we do school in this country. There's no more time for tinkering around the edges. You sound like a radical and a revolutionary. Would you like to see, if I can just put it bluntly, the breakup of the public school system, or as some people call it, the public school monopoly?
What I really want to see is that every child have a great opportunity, an equal opportunity to get a great education in K-12. We know today that far too many kids are not achieving at the levels that they could, that they're stuck in schools that don't work for them, and they don't have the power to move or to move to the suburbs where there's a good school, or to pay tuition to go to a school of their parents' choice. And we know that giving students those kinds of opportunities and empowering families with that kind of option has made a difference in the lives of kids that have been able to take advantage of it. I also know that for over 100 years, we've been doing school essentially the same. And here we're in the 21st century. Technology has changed and revolutionized almost every industry. Education is really the last industry, and let's be very clear, it is an industry that has not undergone the kind of revolution because of technology. And so what I really dream of seeing is a lot more approaches to how to help kids learn and get educated. We see some small examples of these across the country today in personalized learning, in competency-based learning, but there really has not been the kind of groundswell behind some of these ideas. In order to accomplish that, we need a lot more education freedom.
I wonder, do poor parents ever thank you secretly or unsecretly even? Do you have what Tom Sowell calls quiet support?
Indeed. You know, it's really interesting. In this job, I come into places like this usually through not the most glamorous entrance, and often I am greeted by people who are working behind the scenes and encouraged quietly, saying, keep up the good work, we really believe in what you're trying to do. And I've also had the great opportunity to talk with hundreds of parents whose children, who've been able to make the choices that Dick and I were able to make for our children because of efforts at the state level. And most of them with tears in their eyes talking about what a huge difference it's made for their child. And it's really gratifying. It keeps me going every day.
Well, Milton Friedman used to lament that the public wasn't receptive to school choice, and why not? It seemed like such an obvious good. Is your sense that the public is now more receptive to school choice?
Yeah, so the support for the concept of education choice, education freedom has continued to rise and grow. And the most recent data that I've seen on it at the beginning of this calendar year suggests that 2/3 of the general population is supportive of the notion of empowering parents and families to make the right choice and find the right fit for their child. 75% of millennials support this notion, and in the high 60s to around 70 ethnic populations and racial populations. And so there is growing momentum. Let's face it, the kids that are being most helped today and the programs that are most significant in states are the ones that have a high percentage of African American and Hispanic children taking advantage of them. And there is nowhere I go where those opportunities have been unleashed that I don't hear from parents and from teachers involved in that choice, that this is this is a terrific thing, and that we need more of it, not less of it.
Here's a statement from you, which I'll read, and I want to ask you a question about it. You're talking about rethinking school. Why assign kids to schools based on their addresses? Why group kids by age? Why force all students to learn at the same speed? And so on. It all sounds very good to me. But this grouping by age, if I'm, let's say, 10, and I'm a little slow, and I'm in a class with 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds, it's a little stigmatizing. So I support this notion, always have in theory, but when the rubber hits the road, socially it's very, very awkward.
Well, if you're the only 10-year-old and it's all the rest are 8-year-olds, that's one thing. But the competency-based education that I alluded to earlier is really based on the notion that kids learn different subjects at different speeds and grasp concepts at different rates. And I think about a school that our oldest granddaughter is in today. It is a child-directed, student-directed school where each of the kids are in charge of their own learning. They have options of curriculums to pursue, and they set goals for themselves daily and weekly. And they are in a multi-age studio or classroom, and each of them are learning at their own speed. In one subject area, they may be racing along, and in another, they may need more time. But they're also working collaboratively. So if I can grasp a subject area more quickly, and I notice that one of my classmates is struggling in that area, I'll come alongside of him or her and try to help them. I think there are many kids that could thrive in that kind of a learning environment. And right now, that particular school is a private tuition-based school. But in states that have the opportunity for parents to make those choices, it could be a choice for those kids that for whom that kind of learning environment would work.
Well, here's a big question, kind of an ABC question. There are still some, I would call them conservative diehards, old Goldwaterites, who think that there's no real federal role in education. Well, we've had the feds in education for a long time now, and the department since the 70s. Yeah. So are you, in general, at peace with the idea of a federal role, and what is it, generally? I know you're a localist, you're a state person, a county person, a town person. Get it down to the neighborhood level if you can.
Well, I'm very much in favor of shrinking the federal role in education and have been endeavoring to do so in all the ways that I'm empowered to do as Education Secretary, and will continue to. There are a couple of areas that, a couple of laws that have to be administered and observed, but I think the most important consideration is to empower states in the way that was originally intended. And when you think about the fact that only about 8% of education spending in general comes from the federal government, the federal government has had a very outsized role for its investment. And I think we need to get that very much back in balance. And that, Congress took a big step in that direction, at least on paper, when they passed the Every Student Succeeds Act. Now, the past administration came in and started to pass a whole bunch, or started to write a whole bunch of regulations that would have encumbered that Every Student Succeeds Act plan with a lot more federal role. That was all done away with when this administration came in, and Congress did a Congressional Review Act and eliminated all of those regulations. We are going to keep those pure. We're not going to reinstate any of those, and in fact are continuing to push state leadership to take advantage of the flexibilities that they built into that Every Student Succeeds Act. That's a really important, it was a really important piece of legislation to send the signal back to the states that this is really your role and your responsibility. And I would argue it needs to even go down to the most local level, and the most local level is the parent.
You said to me last year, I think, why should the education department be a bank? And I said, what? You said, yes, a bank. It's a really, really, really big bank. And I'd never heard of this. Say it again.
So many people don't realize that the Department of Education has responsibility for all of federal student aid. And today, there's $1.5 trillion in student loan debt that is part of federal student aid. It was not originally set up to be a bank, yet it is the largest loan holder in the nation, larger than any private bank, and it has not operated in the same kind of, with the same kind of rigor that a bank would. We're in the process of many things with regard to federal student aid, chief among them being getting a real clear picture of what is actually inside of the whole loan portfolio. We have increasing talk today about student debt and the implications of student debt, and both individually and collectively. And I think it's a really important discussion that needs to involve Congress and congressional action ultimately, and I will argue needs to reframe how federal student aid is organized and operated ultimately.
Well, of course, some teachers are lousy, some teachers are great, most are in between, I'm sure. I know that we agree that in general this is a noble profession, not to mention a necessary one. And I see these teacher strikes in places like West Virginia, and can't think of other states at the moment, maybe Arizona. And I'm sort of reflexively anti-strike. And yet, I listen to people who say, some of these teachers have been underpaid for a long while. I wonder how to think about teacher pay. Is this strictly a local matter, and we all have our views? It depends on where you live and what the schools are?
Well, I think in general, the teaching profession has become very deprofessionalized over the years, and
Deprofessionalized.
deprofessionalized in many ways, because it is very much like the whole school system, a one-size-fits-all approach. And there's very prescriptive steps that teachers have to follow within their system. They're not really given the kind of autonomy and flexibility to run their classroom and really be their best, because they are within, generally speaking, within a system that makes them very conformist. And not all of them, and I wouldn't say that as a blanket statement, but I have spent time, I've intentionally had multiple roundtables with teachers, some of whom have left the profession, and listening to the reasons why, even though these had been teachers of the year in their states or in their districts. And almost to a person, what I took away was, we don't feel respected, and we don't feel, and that's manifest in not being able to have the kind of autonomy to do what we know is best for the kids that we're in charge of, and we're supposed to be helping to learn. And so one of the proposals that we have put forward as part of our next year budget is to establish a sum of money to establish professional development vouchers for teachers to choose and control their own professional development. That was one big area that they said they have not had any kind of say in. They've had to go to whatever the district told them and check the box exercise, and it hasn't been beneficial or relevant for them. We think that giving them some control of how they continue to develop themselves professionally is a really great idea and should be supported. We also think that helping to create an environment for them in a pilot or experimental setting to allow really great teachers the opportunity to become teachers of teachers. Again, I heard consistently, for a teacher to continue on a career path, in most cases, it is to leave the classroom and to go into administration. And I don't know about any of you, but if my child had a really great teacher, I would want that teacher to help other teachers become better teachers, rather than to go into administration and never be in a classroom with children and in a teaching environment again. So creating a mentorship and residency program for teachers to become teachers of teachers gives them, the really great teachers, a new career path opportunity, and it's beneficial to the new teacher and the learning teacher to come alongside these experienced ones.
We were talking a little earlier about merit pay, and we're all for merit, rah-rah merit. But it seems to me it might be hard to assess in a school, because some teachers have terrific students who are easy to teach. Other teachers have very difficult students, and it's a struggle even to get through the day with everyone safe and alive and so on. So in theory, I'm, yay pro merit, why not? But I also wonder, how do you assess such a thing? Or I guess our general view is we leave it to the locals and the feds do what they should do.
Well, this is a contentious issue, and I think it is a difficult issue to get right. I cannot point to a specific state or locality that has gotten it specifically right. I know that there was a lot of discussion in the recent Denver teachers' strike around the system that they had adopted a dozen years ago there. My understanding is that even going through the unrest there, they ended up at the same place they were before. It is difficult to get right, but I think it's worth working on to get right, because the tendency, without having an opportunity to reward those who are doing particularly well on behalf of kids, is to sort of settle in the middle and be okay with mediocrity. And we should be instilling an attitude of excellence in every school setting and not settle for okay or average. And I don't think that the environment and the system that has been perpetuated now for decades really lends itself to that.
George W. Bush used to say, we just wave the kids through. I can see him waving his hand. We just wave them through without assessing whether they really learned something and should advance.
Well, when you consider the fact that compared to the rest of the developed nations, the United States is 24th in reading, 25th in science, and 40th in math. You know, if we ever
I'm afraid I may contribute to that math problem.
No, but when you think about how upset Americans get when we don't do well in an Olympics,
Yeah.
How we can
Yay,
be
we're number 40.
satisfied,
Yeah.
how we can be satisfied and just sort of look the other way with those kinds of results is very distressing to me.
Let's go back to college. You don't think very much of free speech zones, do you? Oh, no.
No, I do not. That is accurate.
Yeah. You think the whole place should be a free speech zone?
I think it should be. And, you know, learning is about the exchange of ideas. And if you don't have the freedom to debate and discuss ideas freely, you don't really have learning ultimately. And I think there is a real issue with many campuses today, and I hear examples regularly of either subtle or overt efforts to silence some discussion and to elevate other discussion, and we're not doing any young person a service by doing so. And so our president and I have both continued to speak out on this issue very vocally, and I think that is helping to foster more discussion about what that actually means and what that looks like. I think we have to keep the pressure on institutions to really fulfill what their role is as a higher ed institution, and that is to be a facilitator of idea exchange.
Well, you are, if I may put it this way, a daughter of free enterprise. Your father was a great entrepreneur, a legend in our home state of Michigan. And you're a champion of free enterprise, and I think you did some arguing with your professors who were socially conservative, but maybe economically a different way. Do you want to recall some of that?
Yes, I did. I majored in business and political science, and I managed to avoid the worst of the professors, the economics professors, while I was there. But yeah, it was a battle even then, that many years ago, and I fear it's gotten much worse for most campuses. Especially the areas of economics and sociology and business. If you have a single-minded viewpoint expressed in classrooms and you're not invited to really present an alternate view, and in fact are in either overt or subtle ways punished for doing so, again, it is not doing anyone a service, and I would argue it has the accrual of that over the last several decades has really begun to show up in this millennial population.
Well, in my view, the word diversity has been warped to mean race, ethnicity, and so on. But diversity in education is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Pluralism, different points of view, being exposed to all this, especially when young, and you can settle down and do political activism and all that stuff later, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. Well, I had the benefit also at the same college to have two professors that went on to become congressmen from our district. So one was a political science professor, and then after he died very suddenly from a brain tumor. He was succeeded by my physics professor. So that
Who
was
were
quite
they?
interesting.
You recall the names?
Yes, Paul Henry and Vern Ehlers.
Oh, right, right. Now, I have to ask, since we're on the subject of Congressman from Grand Rapids, when you were a girl, just a slip of a child, did you ever meet Jerry Ford?
Oh, I did indeed. In fact, I attribute his campaign in 1976 to getting me involved in politics to begin with. I started, I was in college at the time, and I think between my freshman and sophomore years, and I became a scatter blitzer for Jerry Ford. This was,
Sorry,
yes,
a what?
Yes, this was a made-up word, I acknowledge. I didn't make it up, but so it was a group of college students that were deployed to go door-to-door campaigning for Jerry Ford. We went in Michigan, we went in Ohio, in Indiana, in Wisconsin.
Fantastic.
And then I went to the Kansas City Convention,
Yeah.
and we blitzed there. We would go and create, noise and enthusiasm.
Trying to defeat those
and-
Reagan forces.
Yes,
I know
well,
you would join them later.
Exactly. I mean, it was, and looking back, it was a very interesting, informative time.
I heard President Ford speak in Chrysler Arena in Ann Arbor. I guess that was the first president I ever laid eyes on. I was sitting far away. Here's a question from one of our guests. How will your policies affect low-income rural communities with few non-public school choices available?
This is a really good question. I'm glad somebody raised it. Rural communities have unique challenges, and yet, let's just take a hypothetical. A rural community with a K-12 school of a couple 300 students. Even if that school is the finest school possible for the students attending there, there's probably a handful of kids for which that particular approach to learning might not work. And why wouldn't those kids be able to attend a micro school in that same school building that might have a different approach to how that child was educated? Or I visited Mississippi recently, and a school in a very, very rural area that had a hard time hiring teachers, even for the primary subjects in the school, much less AP Physics. So that school partnered with a nonprofit organization that provided a teacher, a Yale physicist that taught those AP Physics students asynchronously, and each of those students also were matched with a mentor, a physics student in college somewhere else in the country, and they would connect virtually and work on whatever problems they were working on. But it was a very practical solution and a choice that required additional or different deployment of resources. And I use that as an example of what rural communities could and should think about in terms of providing more choices to the students they're serving. Not to suggest that by introducing school choice, another building should go up next door to the existing building, but to think more broadly and creatively about what introducing choices can be or could be.
You're for letting 1,000 flowers bloom, so to speak, in education.
Essentially, yes, and knowing that, again, for well over 150 years, we have been approaching how we do education in very much the same way, and it's no longer relevant for too many people, for too many kids.
Well, we have about 2 minutes. Let's do 2 more, if we can. This celebrated Janus decision, creating the right to work. Will it affect the teachers' unions and put a dent in the monopoly?
Well, I think it's already affecting the teachers' unions, and I'm so thankful for the Supreme Court's decision to free up those who've been coerced to be, participants in something they didn't want to participate in. And I think it is one way to continue to elevate the profession of teaching by allowing the teachers that have been forced previously to be part of this to be freed to not be. I think the challenge, often the challenge in an actual school building, and I've heard this from all too many teachers to know that this is not an isolated case, is if the peer pressure is such that those who opt not to be a part of the teachers union are punished in some way, that ultimately is not healthy for anyone, and it's certainly not healthy for the students that they're trying to teach. But I think that there will be increasingly impactful implications from the decision.
I'll give you a grand total of 30 seconds to pronounce on a question about which many books have been written. So this summit has to do with the American experiment, and will it succeed? And, a republic, if you can keep it. You've been in government now for a couple of years, after being around it for a very long time. You've been at the heights now. Are you bullish on America? Are you a little bit more cynical, or what's your impression?
Well, I've always been an optimist, and I continue to be very optimistic about the future of this nation. I am even more optimistic when I meet kids and see the excitement in their eyes for the futures that they have envisioned. And I think the issue of education and how we ultimately support and approach education, though, is of fundamental importance for us to grapple with. And I don't think if we insist on supporting and keeping the same one-size-fits-all system for every student that can't afford to go somewhere else by paying to do so, that future is not as bright. I think it will be bright if we do indeed let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Well, I quote to you Bruce Kovner, who says that he knows, and he knows them all. He knows of no one in the education field more selfless, more devoted, more right than the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. So thank you very much.